The most prosperous city of all time, suddenly destroyed by an enormous catastrophe. Atlantis, the lost paradise of the antiquity.
Atlantis is like an end-of-the-world story that happened at the beginning.
Researchers are looking for the legendary city.
I do think that Atlantis existed.
Where was this mythical island located? Are there any traces of the Atlanteans? Will Atlantis ever be found? The great myths of mankind. Mysteries passed on over thousands of years. Inexplicable events, places shrouded in legend, and superhuman heroes. Even scientists are fascinated. Is there any truth to these ancient legends? Researchers across the globe are working hard to solve the greatest mysteries of our time. Greece, the island of Santorini. Some researchers believe this is the former site of Atlantis. Geologist Avi Nomikou first heard about Atlantis when she was a child. But how to tell truth from legend?
When I was a child, the grandfathers always telling us stories about the myth of Atlantis. They told us about a brilliant city that was decorated with high buildings, and all the people were very rich. And that city was just in the middle of a volcano.
Santorini is an island in the southern Aegean Sea. Its ring-like structure points to a volcanic inferno. The crater island near Kameni at its heart. The caldera is surrounded by land emerging from the sea. The legendary city of Atlantis is said to have consisted of 3 aquatic and 2 terrestrial rings encircling the main island. That's why many believe that Santorini must be where Atlantis was. Could Atlantis be buried underneath the rugged volcanic landscape? Geologist Avi Nomikou specializes in volcanoes. She grew up here. Could the city of Atlantis that her grandfathers told her about really be on this volcanic island?
Before 3,600 years, at this place, there was a small island with the same geometry, with the same composition, lava composition, and at the top of this volcano, a city was built on.
Was it truly Atlantis? Had it been annihilated by a massive eruption? The Santorini volcano has erupted several times over the past 3,000 years, but the first lead points us 200 kilometers northwest. To Athens. In 360 BC, philosopher Plato describes Atlantis as a splendid island nation which had ruled over the entire Mediterranean region 9,000 years earlier, with a commanding fleet, untold wealth, and unparalleled power. The capital has a large commercial port. The Atlantean battleships are even said to have defied the Athenian naval power. Navigable canals run through the entire city. In the center, there's an acropolis with a temple for Poseidon, the god of the seas. The buildings and streets are embellished with gold, silver, and a fiery toned metal, bearing testimony of their once glamorous population.
According to the Greek myths, the gods divided up the world, and appropriately for Poseidon as god of the sea, he was given an island. He then had many children, 5 sets of twins, and he gave the most beautiful part of his island to his firstborn son, Atlas. and in Greek, Atlantis literally means Atlas's island.
According to Plato, the land is particularly fertile and home to a rich flora and fauna, including exotic elephants. But one day, the thriving metropolis falls victim to a natural catastrophe. According to Plato, the earthquakes and floods are the gods' way of punishing the Atlanteans for their sinful lifestyle.
The myth of Atlantis is important to us today because it's the story of a once highly developed culture which was lost, which has utterly disappeared. It's a story of hubris, it's a story of punishment, and in the modern world in which we think we know so much, we celebrate our achievements, well, it serves as a pretty powerful warning.
But is Atlantis completely buried? Or can we still find traces of the legendary city today? Sunken cities are not rare. Bahia, off the Neapolitan coast, is a paradise for divers. Places like this keep the hope alive that Atlantis will also be discovered one day. The extent of the volcano's destruction is visible on Santorini to this day. The volcanic sediments reach high into the sky in this former quarry. A 30-meter layer of pumice has buried all traces of life.
So we are at the central part of Santorini volcano in an old quarry. For us, it's a geological monument, and you can admire the soil, the landscape before the Minoan eruption. So you need to imagine that the people were walking on this landscape.
According to Plato, the Atlanteans are progressive and hungry for knowledge, but also arrogant, autocratic, and bellicose. The gods punish them for their insolence and lifestyle.
We can see the thin layer of the precursory explosion, only 10 centimeters or less. We don't know the exact time, but lots of earthquakes occur during this first explosion. Then the main eruption started, and the first phase is the Plinian column with the ash up to 39 kilometers in the air.
Commercial aircraft only fly at 10 kilometers altitude for comparison. The ash column that Santorini volcano shot into the air in 1600 BC was 39 kilometers high.
Plato could have been inspired by all sorts of natural events, tsunamis and floods. One of them might have been the Minoan eruption. It was a cataclysmic event, and we know that it was felt right across the Mediterranean from Greece to Egypt.
The volcano buries the entire island, wreaking havoc. Temples, roads, and ships are torn up, destroyed, and swallowed by the lava. The eruption was extremely powerful. This is because the massive rocks didn't melt and move. The crater just became clogged with boulders, and eventually it exploded. In 1980, Mount St. Helens in Washington, USA, faced the same fate. The volcano erupted with destructive power. Was Atlantis wiped out by a volcanic catastrophe? One thing we know for sure is that the legend of pride and fall has impressed generations worldwide. The myth of Atlantis enthralls many. Pondering about what the legendary empire might have looked like has led to countless books, films, and computer games. Many people are not only looking for the location, but also to experience the superhuman force that Atlantis is said to emit. In Germany, the search for Atlantis has been popular since as early as the 1920s. In Bremen, an entire new building was dedicated exploring the past. The Atlantis House is home to a heritage center meant to bring light into the alleged history of Germanic peoples as the descendants of Atlantis. On its facade, the Tree of Life, a prominent feature in Nordic mythology. The modern use of forms in the Art Deco staircase and the Sky Room are meant to give the viewer a glimpse into the myth of Atlantis.
Throughout the 19th century, many people searched for Atlantis. Spiritists, occultists, and psychics believed they could find Atlantis or that it would re-emerge. Later, the Nazis evidently put a great deal of effort into pursuing anything that fit into their ideology, which also included finding Atlantis.
Atlantis House was built by an SS patron member who shared SS Chief Heinrich Himmler's firm belief in the supremacy of the Nordic race. Himmler invests large sums trying to prove that the Teutons descend from the Atlanteans. He hopes archaeologists will find evidence of ancient Aryans in Atlantis. Their search took them as far as Tibet. Ernst Schaefer was the head of the expedition. He believed the survivors of Atlantis found shelter on the Tibetan plateau. He left empty-handed. The belief in Atlantis is also fueled by the discovery of another city shrouded in legend. For centuries, Troy was thought to be a myth described in the Iliad by the Greek poet Homer. In 1870, Heinrich Schliemann finds the ancient city of Troy in today's Turkey. The myth becomes a reality. Can Atlantis be found too?
We have so many stories about Atlantis. It is a magical undersea world. And if you were the archaeologist to discover that, like the discovery of Troy, you would go down in history.
US researcher Richard Freund is convinced that he'll be able to unearth Atlantis. He's an expert on the archaeology of mythical cities and firmly believes that Atlantis did exist. He is basing his search on descriptions by Greek philosopher Plato. But Richard Freund isn't looking in Greece. He's got his eyes set on southern Spain, not far from the Straits of Gibraltar. He believes that the remains of Atlantis are hidden in the sand dunes of the Doñana National Park.
We are at ground zero for Atlantis.
Freund has a theory. He believes that the stretches of land now covered in sand were once a thriving island state, until Atlantis was destroyed by a devastating tsunami.
Plato says in one fateful night, the entire city sunk and was located in an impassable mud and disappeared. Meaning it's not something that happened over a long period of time. He's talking about a cataclysmic, catastrophic end to the city.
To Freund, it's just a matter of time until he finds the first piece of evidence here in southern Spain. And indeed, the location of Doñana National Park matches Plato's description astonishingly well.
Plato says it's located by the Pillars of Hercules. The Pillars of Hercules was known by ancient mariners as being a very specific spot. So it's not located in Africa or India or Asia. It's located by the Pillars of Hercules, which today we call the Strait of Gibraltar.
Doñana National Park is about 80 kilometers northwest of Gibraltar. During the antiquity, the prominent rocks on the European and African side mark the end of the known world.
In the antiquity, this whole area of the Doñana was an open bay. You had this big, massive open bay where ships could come in and ships could go out to the Atlantic and into the Mediterranean. This was the end of the earth for almost every single ancient mariner.
Freund believes that ships used to be able to navigate through what we know today as marshland. If you imagine it with canals and ring-shaped islands, it looks just like Plato's descriptions of Atlantis.
So this really is the place. You're looking at ground zero in these dunes. The ocean, the dunes, and the location of the city.
Atlantis could be very real. In fact, there could be multiple Atlantises. Plato places it where the Atlantic opens out into the Mediterranean. And typically, huge cities with lots of wealth grow up in places that control this kind of a strait. We think of Troy or Constantinople. So in some ways, it's kind of hard to imagine that there wouldn't have been a great city there.
Plato claims he received his information from an ancestor who described the Atlanteans as a superior civilization with vast expertise in weapons technology and metalwork. Not far from the national park, there is a place that could reveal more about Atlantis. A building 5,000 years old, made of massive stones. The unusual monument is discovered and excavated during construction works in the 1920s. It's a Neolithic tomb site and provides a glimpse into a fascinating culture. Archaeologist Claudio Lozano is keen on finding out more about the people who once lived here. The finds from the dolmen bring up many questions. In the stone, there are engravings and incisions. Could these maybe be star maps like the ones used by seafarers? How the weapons were depicted, which were most likely made of metal, is even more intriguing.
What makes this dolmen special is that most of the stone pillars were decorated with pictograms. And here we see they depict weapons, metal weapons.
Do these pictures date back to the time when the burial site was built? Or were they added to the stones at a later date? Plato did mention a rare metal in Atlantis. Is the dolmen the Atlantean survivors' claim to immortality? The dolmen is proof of a highly functional and progressive settlement in southern Spain dating back more than 5,000 years. Early civilizations almost exclusively settled near water. Archaeological finds are particularly common along coastlines and rivers.
Water is the source of life. Humans need water to drink, they need water to cook, to farm, and water also provides transport. It's why water really is the cradle of civilization, and most successful civilizations sprang up near sources of water.
To find traces of ancient civilizations, you have to know where rivers used to run. Huelva Port, early morning. A research catamaran is waiting for Claudio Lozano and his team. They want to have a closer look at the sea floor in front of the Doñana National Park. Over thousands of years, the coastline has changed dramatically. Water covers what once was land with rivers running through it. Is this the location of Plato's Atlantis, the city beyond the Pillars of Hercules?
We're now following the coastline towards a stretch of sea across from the Rio Piedras. The place we're headed to used to be the estuary of this river, somewhere between 9,000 and 10,000 BC.
10,000 years ago, the coastline was about 125 meters further west. Claudio Lozano hopes his search for old river channels will help him find former settlements, or ideally, the ruins of Atlantis.
We've been here a couple of times, but we want to take a closer look at this particular spot. And this time we're using a high-precision sonar. This spot is perpendicular to the coastline and is exactly where the estuary was.
Maritime archaeologist Claudio Lozano and soil investigation expert Miguel Gonzalez hoped to finally come up with solid evidence. Their sensitive sonar device picks up even the slightest elevations on the ocean floor. This also allows them to find river channels that are thousands of years old.
This is where we choose the frequency.
If they find proof of these former estuaries, it could point to an ancient civilization. Advanced civilizations like Atlantis always built their cities close to water.
This broad perspective on the sea floor shows us exactly what it looks like and where there are shapes pointing to a former estuary. This case is a perfect example. It's obvious that this used to be a riverbed. Now it's covered by ocean floor, it's filled with sediments, but the sonar allows us to detect the riverbed below the ocean floor. Examining these riverbeds is key. Getting closer to the riverbeds means we're getting closer to where people built their settlements.
The site they're looking for is almost 2 kilometers off the coast. Does the sea floor have something to show us? Diving is the only way to find out. They're looking for an ancient riverbed, hoping to maybe even find the remains of a settlement. The researchers look for geological clues. Nature leaves its marks even after 10,000 years. The divers find pebbles on the ocean floor that were clearly brought there by rivers, showing that this floor wasn't always covered by the sea. A success for Claudio Lozano and his team. They've found the estuary of a long-forgotten river, and therefore maybe also a first glimpse into a human settlement. But they're still a long way from finding actual proof that Atlantis existed in southern Spain. The searchers won't give up. Richard Freund's hypothesis that Atlantis was a powerful harbor city near Gibraltar remains one of several possibilities.
Atlantis has become a kind of repository in our imagination for all these lost lands that were before a flood or some ancient forgotten place. And there are very real cities that were lost to coastlines and the flooding that would have happened there. It's possible that Atlantis is a kind of combination of real lost places and some mythical notion of a time before time.
Santorini, an island in the Aegean Sea, has been of interest to those looking for Atlantis for a while now. Over 3,600 years ago, a devastating eruption shook the island. Near Kameni is in the center of the caldera. To geologist Evi Nomiku, this is the epicenter of the catastrophe that sealed the fate of all living beings for kilometers around, an event that left its traces on history.
Nea Kameni has been created due to the fact that it has many different volcanic centers that gives lava.
We don't know of any other eruption more destructive than the one in the 16th century BC. It affected all civilizations across the eastern Mediterranean and even destroyed the Minoan culture on Crete, some 200 kilometers away. Some believe that Atlantis actually is Crete.
Two great civilizations existed around the Greek islands of Crete and Santorini, the Cycladic and the Minoan cultures. They were related to each other, and they shared some similarities with the Atlanteans as described by Plato. So there's every chance that they were actually related to those people.
The volcanic eruption on Santorini triggers a tsunami, wiping out all inhabited coastal regions in the eastern Mediterranean. The northern hemisphere faces several years of winter. The Minoan Empire on Crete ceases to exist. An actual natural catastrophe. Is this the origin of the legend of Atlantis? Efi Nomikou is looking for traces of a lost advanced civilization on Santorini. She's heading to the Akrotiri excavation site. Together with Ioannis Betis, an architect, Efi visits the remains of a settlement once covered by volcanic ash. These cultural artifacts were hidden for thousands of years and weren't discovered until 1967. Archaeologists are staggered by what they find here. Buildings several stories high with sophisticated details. This level of advancement can only be attributed to the Atlanteans, according to Plato.
The special thing is that we have the chance to have a very good preservation of the artifacts and of the architecture of a prehistoric city. The ash that covered all the entire city helped all the materials and the buildings to survive until our times.
The architectural style in Akrotiri is not typical for antiquity. Large windows and up to 3 stories high, toilets inside buildings. These must have been the homes of affluent people.
The lavatory is quite a surprise for the archaeologist because usually we found these kind of places outside of the houses. Instead here they have already 3,000 years ago, the mentality of placing the lavatory inside the building.
They also found beautiful murals showing women with precious jewels. What happened to these people? Were the residents of Akrotiri able to escape on boats? By the time the eruption hits the city, everyone has already gone.
Here we can see a building, only 1 floor, okay, that has been covered completely by the huge volume of pumice. So just in front of us, at the bottom, you can distinguish the first layer of the Minoan eruption. Up to now, we didn't find any bodies, so we do believe that the people escaped before the last phase, before the Minoan eruption started to be very destructive.
No dead bodies and no signs of survivors. Just impressive evidence of a lost civilization. The finds are preserved in the prehistoric museum in the island's capital, Fira. Kostas Sakavaris might be the greatest expert when it comes to these artifacts and their history. Proudly, he presents a table.
So this is the plaster cast of a very elaborate piece of furniture. It shows us the sophistication level of this ancient society, because it's a piece that very much reminds us also of modern pieces.
The wood of the table burned in the heat of the eruption. All that remains is a detailed cast. Thousands of objects tell the story of an incredibly rich city that disappeared.
This is foreign pottery that was found in Akrotiri.
Okay.
So we have Aegina, we have Greek mainland, we have also islands, nearby islands like Kea or Naxos,
okay,
or even a little bit farther islands, Kos, Dodecanese region,
yeah,
and definitely Crete, which was a superpower of its time.
Yeah.
The collection even contains objects from the Middle East and Egypt. Little boxes for perfumes, jewelry, and artistic vases.
It tells us that this is an affluent society that had covered its very basic survival needs and had an appetite also for some luxury wear, exotic stuff that was brought from other places.
So it seems to be that the place in Akrotiri, or the Atlantic city, was the center of that civilization. So it seems to be a commercial center of the Eastern Mediterranean.
A fresco that was well preserved also points to the importance of trade. The image has scientists' heads turning. Does it depict Atlantis? Many details match. A large fleet, the capital surrounded by water and red rocks, just as Plato describes it. Red rocks can be seen on Santorini to this day. Are they leading us to Atlantis?
All these rocks are very old rocks, and they have not been covered by the Minoan deposits. You can see that this red scoria is full of iron, okay? And from the frescoes, you can imagine that the port, a separate port, was also located in this area.
Astonishing parallels. Did the heart of the story of Atlantis take place here on Santorini? A port from which residents escaped when the volcano erupted?
I do think that Atlantis existed. Yes, it's a very good story, but all of the great stories do have an element of truth deep down inside them.
But one thing doesn't add up in the Santorini theory. According to Plato, Atlantis is located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, behind Gibraltar. Researchers and explorers are looking for Atlantis almost everywhere in the world. In the Bahamas, in Brazil, in the Canary Islands, in the North Sea, or on Sri Lanka. Central America is among the top candidates. The founding myth of the Aztecs is said to contain clues. It refers to a mythical place called Aztlan, and it's not just a name that bears a striking resemblance to Atlantis. Aztlan is also said to have been located on an island. In the 14th century, the Aztecs built their huge capital Tenochtitlan in a lake in Mexico. Are they reminiscing about their sunken hometown of Atlantis? But how would Greek philosopher Plato have come to hear about a story from Central America almost 2,000 years before Columbus?
One of the reasons why Atlantis is so curious and fascinating has to do with the way it may or may not play into ancient civilizations. And if it does play a role, it's probably as this seafaring culture that's extended across a kind of nodal network. The other thing about Atlantis is that it represents a time before the flood, just like Eden. So it's kind of this mythic memory of an ancient past.
Michael Ertl thinks he knows where Atlantis is located. On his YouTube channel, he spends his time investigating great myths. Ertl believes Atlantis was discovered a long time ago in a place that's now far away from the sea.
Hello and welcome to a new episode on my YouTube channel. Today we're looking into the theory of Atlantis and whether this city really existed. Or is it just a legend? Well, today we're going to get to the bottom of this question. It's been investigated many times, and some believe this ancient civilization was based in Santorini or somewhere along the Spanish coast. But today we want to talk about a structure that was first discovered in 1965 during the Gemini 4 mission. It can only really be seen from space and is located in Western Africa. It is called the Eye of the Sahara, or the Richard structure.
There's a rock formation in Mauritania in Western Africa that really looks like an eye, or like the island city of Atlantis. In the beginning, experts believed this structure was a crater from a meteor, but nothing points to an impact. Michael Ertl sees another parallel to Atlantis.
In his works, Plato writes that Atlantis consisted of 3 rings of water and 2 rings of land, and we can actually see this here, the central island, the first and second rings of land, separated by rings of water. So in total there are 3 aquatic rings and 2 terrestrial rings. But of course, we're still left wondering whether this is a natural structure or one that is man-made.
An island city without any water? But this area wasn't always a desert. In the last ice age, there were rivers and freshwater lakes in northern Africa. Uttle shows us footage from an expedition to the eye of the Sahara. If you're standing inside the rings, they look like mountain ranges. Only once you're far away are you able to imagine this area was once inhabited. An important discovery, a well. To this day, caravans take a break in the eye of the Sahara to fill up on their water supply. Could a well like this also have been the Atlanteans' freshwater source? And how is it possible that this structure in the Sahara points to the home of a once great naval power? Michael Uttle subscribes to the theory that the sea level was much higher 10,000 years ago and only dropped after the last ice age. Simulating the sea level over time, Uttle notices something.
If you raise the sea level to 425 meters, you can see clearly that this structure, as Plato described, has a natural opening in the south, so boats could go in and out.
Atlantis in the Sahara? Geologists debunk the theory. The ring-shaped mountains were caused by volcanic forces. They were not man-made.
There are a lot of supernatural theories out there, and you've got to locate them somewhere. Atlantis serves as a kind of blank screen onto which we can project these ideas, these stories of fallen civilizations, aliens, you name it.
Atlantis fuels people's imagination and ambition. If someone were to find Plato's city, they would be famous around the world. Dieter Bremer is captivated by a completely new theory. If you read Plato's original text correctly, he says you shouldn't look for Atlantis on Earth.
Well, I would look for Atlantis where Plato said it was. One often wonders, what is the Atlantean Sea? It reminds me of the Titan Atlas, who carried the sky. So, following this logic, the Atlantean Sea could also be considered the Celestial Sea.
The former chemical engineer is looking for Atlantis from the perspective of technology. He believes that the Atlanteans were far more progressive than any other ancient civilization, literally supernatural.
Based on my findings, Atlantis was a concentric ring system in the sky, revolving around itself. This means it was a generational spacecraft, a mothership, a huge space station that was home to a civilization. And these people visited Earth, astronauts that were so technologically advanced that they must have seemed like gods to the Stone Age humans on Earth.
Atlantis, a circular space station in orbit? Bremer's hypothesis builds on the idea of ancient astronauts, which was made famous by writer Erich von Däniken. According to this theory, there were astronaut gods who gave knowledge and technology to humanity, namely in the form of crystal energy. Some believe that this also explains the Egyptian pyramids and hieroglyphs.
The theory involving ancient astronauts is popular among esoterics. This is where Atlantis fits in. These people claim that Atlantis, just like the pyramids or the Nazca lines, has been created by extraterrestrials because they simply cannot fathom that ancient people were able to create such advanced things.
Dieter Bremer thinks he's found evidence corroborating his theory in various ancient civilizations. Are they depicting space stations?
I can see elements of Atlantis in many concentric ring systems or systems consisting of a ring and a cross. You can find similar traditions everywhere in the world.
Atlantis in space? We likely won't find any artifacts out there. A critical interpretation of Plato's text could also be worthwhile. Is the author even trying to describe a real place? He's writing about a war between Atlantis and Athens.
Plato creates Atlantis as the arrogant, overconfident monarchy which threatens the survival of his ideal state, represented by ancient Athens. It's an allegory which contrasts the arrogance and overbearing state of the monarchy with the ideal nation-state, democracy, as described by Plato. In a way, Plato's asking us to think about our ideas about power and government.
That means Atlantis is only an allegory used to illustrate the victory of democracy over monarchy.
If the battles between Athens and Atlantis truly did take place, there would be more testimonies than just Plato's. Because unlike Troy and Delphi, Atlantis is not featured in any recorded history.
Could it be that Atlantis is just pure fiction? A tale from ancient Greece? Many researchers think Plato's descriptions are too realistic for that to be true. Richard Freund firmly believes in the existence of an ancient superpower destroyed by a natural catastrophe. He says a tsunami in Doñana National Park in southern Spain put an end to the capital's brilliant presence. According to his theory, the tsunami washed away the city. A picture taken from space reinforces his theory. Satellite images seem to show strange patterns. Do they point to Atlantis? Plato describes a harbor city with 3 circular basins, even providing exact measurements. Do they match the structures in the satellite images? Is the rectangular shape in the center the foundation of Poseidon's Atlantean temple? A local inspection in the mostly uninhabited Doñana National Park. At the very highest point, the Cerro del Trigo, Richard Freund describes how the search for Atlantis here in Spain became his mission in life.
Now, what's interesting about all the years that we did this work is that it all started with this space photography from the 1980s. You could see rectangles, circles, straight lines, and all of these don't occur in nature. We need evidence of massive building inside the park. Then, together with the textual information, together with the photography, maybe we could say that this is the best location.
Excavations started in the middle of the park in 1920, but were never finished. Today, the area is protected. New excavations, impossible. The site looks just as archaeologists left it 100 years ago. Richard Freund and his son Ethan are looking for clues. A rock is sticking out of the ground. Or is it a piece of masonry, maybe dating back to the Bronze Age? It would be the first real piece of evidence Richard Freund can use to support his Atlantis theory. Will years of work finally pay off?
We're going to measure this edge, and then I want to just measure this edge. This is a right angle. There are no right angles in nature. This is something that was man-made.
5 meters long, almost a perfect right angle. Freund hopes to have found the outer walls of a large building.
So we have one clear section of the wall. What's very specific about this is this stone looks like it's been cut. It reflects human activity because it has right angles. Right angles only appear in human activity, not in nature.
A stone that looks like a wall. A single but valuable piece of evidence. Freund wants to believe it.
So you can see the same kinds of shells that we saw out on the beach. And they're embedded in this marl that's attached to the rock, which is not indigenous to this area. So this was all brought in, and you can see that it's all part of a massive rock that, with the marl on top, that was embedded in the earth right here.
Atlantis buried beneath the Spanish swamp. To Freud, this is more than a theory.
This is the last piece of the puzzle. You look at that and you say to yourself, what is it? Well, sometimes big things come in small packages. And this is a massive wall that is embedded in the sand. It's unlike anything else. And for all intents and purposes, there should be no major stone like that in this entire area. And yet it's there.
Spain or Santorini? Avi Nomikou is able to provide solid evidence of a big city on the island during antiquity, and that a volcanic explosion destroyed everything. Using a glove, she demonstrates how the explosion went down.
So imagine that this is the magmatic chamber of Santorini. It's full of magma, and it's beneath Santorini volcano. So what we are going to do, we will show how the Atlantis disappeared.
Hundreds of meters underneath the surface, the pressure inside the magma chamber continues to rise.
This is Atlantis, just at the top of the volcanic cone of the Pre-Kameni island.
The eruption empties the chamber. It collapses and brings everything down with it.
There's a huge caldera, but Atlantis had been disappeared under the very many layers of sediments.
Is the ancient city on Santorini really Atlantis? The evidence is still too scant. Avi Nomikou and her colleague Othonas Vlasopoulos want to take a closer look at the mega crater. The volcano is largely immersed in the sea.
So this is a small robot. This is a small ROV. We call it as Jason. And we will explore the seafloor very close to Kameni just to see the morphology of the lava that is cooling down on the seafloor.
8 engines and 3 cameras.
Volcano, I'm doing slowly.
The robot takes over for the divers and provides high-resolution images. Jason passes by lava solidified quite some time ago. The sea floor has been shaped by a powerful volcanic event.
The shape, okay?
And at last, a discovery.
Oh, Evie, come and see something.
Okay, wait. Need to be extra careful. Okay, so.
Have a look at this.
Wow, what are these?
It feels like steps, something like that.
Yeah, definitely, these are steps, but can you move towards to this side?
Yes.
Underwater stairs? Could they belong to a former harbor? To Avi Nomikou, these images are another step on the way to finding Atlantis. But they will need to conduct more dives to find out whether these steps are man-made or a product of nature.
I believe that there was a magic city just in the middle of the caldera, and that city has been destroyed completely. But we need to search more and explore more. And when we find some evidence from the seafloor, not something that we will find on land, then I will be completely sure that Santorini was Atlantis.
Was Plato describing a real city and an actual catastrophe after all? Is there at least some truth to his story? If there is, there must be traces.
No culture, no civilization like the size of Atlantis could ever be totally destroyed. So we question what happened to the survivor.
Are the descendants of the Atlanteans still living among us? Will we ever find real proof?
One thing is certain, so advanced is modern historical research and modern archaeology that if it did exist, we'd definitely be able to find it. So we just need to keep looking and to keep digging.
Or does it turn out that Atlantis is nothing but a myth? A message from Plato warning us not to be too greedy and arrogant.
We are still fascinated by the myth of Atlantis because it's about the destruction of an advanced civilization. Today, we think we're at the peak of our civilization, but what Atlantis shows us is that even we are vulnerable. It's a terrifying story, but one that we are actually attracted to.
An allegory for a downfall, or an echo of a real civilization. Atlantis remains an unsolved mystery.